The morning sun filtered through the tall, narrow windows of the small-town courtroom, casting long stripes across the polished wooden floor. Despite its modest size, the courtroom hummed with an unusual tension, as if the walls themselves were aware of the drama unfolding within. Spectators whispered in low tones, shuffling uneasily in their seats, and the occasional creak of leather saws against the hardwood amplified the anticipation. This was no ordinary day. Today, the courtroom would witness a case that had captivated the entire town, a burglary of a family heirloom, so rare and valuable that its disappearance had left neighbors shaken. The stolen item wasn't just expensive. It carried generations of history, a symbol of legacy and pride. The prosecution had prepared meticulously, armed with photographs, fingerprints, and the unwavering confidence of a trained police dog. The dog, a German shepherd named Rex, was no ordinary canine. He had completed rigorous training and was known for an impeccable record in tracking scents, identifying suspects, and detecting hidden items. Rex had become a silent hero in the department, praised for his intelligence and loyalty. Today, he would be called to demonstrate his skills in front of a jury and a judge who expected nothing short of perfection. The officers handled him with quiet authority, and his presence alone commanded respect, drawing the eyes of many in the courtroom. Amid the sea of adults, a small figure sat near the back, almost unnoticed at first glance. She was 3 years old, diminutive and fragile-looking. Her tiny hands clutched tightly around her mother's fingers. Her eyes, wide and bright, moved rapidly across the room, taking in every detail: the angles of the ceiling, the glint of sunlight off the polished wood, the subtle gestures of the officers, and most importantly, the dog itself. Unlike the adults around her, who filtered the events through layers of logic, law, and assumptions, she seemed to absorb everything directly, instinctively, with a clarity that was almost eerie for her age. Her mother, seated beside her, whispered gentle reassurances, smoothing down her daughter's wispy hair and adjusting the little dress that had been chosen for the day. "It's okay, sweetheart," she murmured. "Just stay with me." The girl's attention, however, was not on her mother's comforting words, but on the unfolding scene before her. Something in her small mind told her that today was important, that the events playing out were not ordinary, and that her own observations might matter more than anyone could imagine. The courtroom doors opened again, and the suspect was led in by officers. A middle-aged man with a nervous demeanor. He wore a gray suit slightly too big for him, as if borrowed from another life. His eyes darted nervously to the jury, then to the judge, and finally to the police dog, whose sharp gaze seemed to pierce through him. He fidgeted in his seat, pulling at his tie and tapping his fingers against the polished wood of the bench. Everyone had formed their opinions about him long before the trial began. He was quiet, tense, and clearly fearful, which, in the eyes of many, already suggested guilt. The judge, an older man with a reputation for fairness, but also for impatience with theatrics, called the court to order. "We will begin with the evidence presentation," he said, his voice steady and commanding. The prosecution approached, presenting documents and photographs, each carefully labeled and highlighted. They spoke with confidence, explaining the sequence of events leading up to the burglary, pointing to inconsistencies in the suspect's alibi, and emphasizing the reliability of Rex, the police dog. Each word was measured, precise, intended to construct an airtight narrative that would leave no room for doubt. As the dog was brought forward, the tension in the room became almost tangible. Rex sat obediently, ears perked, eyes focused, exuding a calm yet commanding presence. The adults were impressed. The child, however, seemed fascinated in a way that suggested more than simple curiosity. She leaned slightly forward, eyes tracking the dog's every movement. Her finger twitched, a subtle but deliberate gesture, as though she were pointing out details others failed to see. She noted the way Rex's tail swished slightly, the tension in his posture, the slight lift of his nose as he sniffed the air. For adults, these were minor details. For her, they were clues. Throughout the proceedings, the spectators shifted in their seats, some whispering about the uniqueness of having a police dog testify in the courtroom, others speculating on the details of the crime. Lawyers spoke in professional tones, citing precedent, statutes, and expert testimony. Yet amidst the complexity of legal jargon, the small girl's observations remained simple, precise, and remarkably perceptive. She noticed the suspect's subtle flinches, the way his gaze avoided certain areas of the courtroom, and the way the dog's focus shifted toward him. It was as though the room held two parallel narratives, one of trained adults interpreting law and procedure, and another of pure, unfiltered observation through a child's eyes. The mother glanced down at her daughter periodically, noting her intense focus. "Sweetie, just sit quietly," she whispered. The girl nodded slightly, but her eyes never left the unfolding scene. She seemed to understand that her small presence mattered in ways the adults could not yet grasp. In her mind, she had already started connecting dots, seeing patterns that others assumed were hidden beneath layers of evidence. She didn't yet understand the full power of her insight, but she sensed that today, something important was about to happen. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath as the first demonstration with Rex began. The dog's handler instructed him, and Rex moved with trained precision, sniffing objects, examining the area, and reacting to the suspect's presence. The adults leaned forward, watching for confirmation of guilt. Meanwhile, the child's attention never wavered. She observed the subtle cues, the way Rex hesitated for a fraction of a second, the way his posture changed imperceptibly, the tiny signals that adults overlooked. Something in her mind clicked. She whispered two words to her mother, softly, almost as if testing them. Not him. No one in the courtroom heard. It was too quiet, too soft. But her words, simple and innocent, carried an authenticity that would soon resonate far beyond the confines of the room. For now, only her mother noticed, her eyes widening as she felt a chill run down her spine. Could a 3-year-old truly understand the gravity of the situation? Could she see the truth hidden beneath layers of evidence and training? The answer, unknown to everyone else, was yes. In just a few moments, the courtroom would shift from a theater of legal procedure to a stage where innocence, intuition, and observation would challenge certainty itself. As the first part of the demonstration concluded, spectators murmured among themselves, impressed by the dog's training. Lawyers jotted notes, preparing their next arguments. The suspect adjusted in his seat, sweat beading along his forehead. The judge leaned back, evaluating the proceedings with a critical eye. And in the back row, the small girl, quiet yet intensely aware, continued to observe. She was a mere 3 years old, underestimated by nearly everyone, yet her presence would prove pivotal. Her innocence, clarity, and courage had already begun to plant the seeds of doubt, the first hints of a revelation that would shake the courtroom to its core. The courtroom settled back into a tense hush after the initial demonstration of Rex's skills. The German Shepherd had moved with a precision that left the adults impressed, and the jury leaning forward in their seats. Lawyers whispered to each other, confident that the dog's instincts would confirm their narrative. Yet, amidst the serious faces and calculated glances, the small 3-year-old girl remained an island of focused attention, her wide eyes flicking from the suspect to the dog, and back again. Unlike the adults, who filtered every action through preconceptions, she observed with raw perception, noting details too small for anyone else to notice. Her tiny finger twitched again, almost imperceptibly at first, as she began pointing subtly. First at the dog, following its paws as it sniffed around the bench. Then at the suspect, whose discomfort grew as Rex's attention lingered in his direction. Finally, her finger traced a line toward a small gap near the corner of the room, a place most adults ignored. She whispered something to her mother, soft enough that no one else could hear. But her mother caught the words and felt an involuntary shiver. "Not him," the child said quietly, her voice filled with a certainty that belied her age. Her mother's eyes widened. Could it be possible? Could a 3-year-old see something adults had missed? She tried to calm herself, reminding herself that toddlers often had wild imaginations, that their words were rarely evidence. Yet the conviction in her daughter's voice, the steady gaze, the deliberate pointing, suggested this was different. This was clarity, unclouded by assumptions, learned knowledge, or fear. She watched the child, a mixture of astonishment and protective concern rising in her chest. The judge, an observant man with decades of courtroom experience, noticed the subtle motion of the girl's hand. He squinted, tilting his head as he followed the gesture. Lawyers from both sides glanced, curious, though they assumed it was a child's fidgeting. The mother tried to guide her daughter, whispering gentle instructions to sit still. The girl, however, remained intent, seemingly aware that what she had observed mattered. Every twitch of her finger, every motion of her eyes, was deliberate. She was forming a mental map of the room, the people, and the events, connecting dots that adults had assumed were invisible. The prosecution resumed its presentation, confident that Rex's demonstration would secure their case. They highlighted the suspect's nervous demeanor, the inconsistencies in his statements, and the circumstantial evidence pointing to him. The dog, trained and dependable, had sniffed the suspect, signaling alertness and partial recognition. The adults nodded, assuming that the evidence was clear-cut. But the girl's attention never wavered. She noticed the subtle difference in the dog's posture, a slight hesitation as it approached the suspect. That tiny pause, invisible to most adults, screamed volumes to her perceptive mind. Something was off. Something didn't add up. Her mother whispered again. "Sweetheart, remember to stay quiet." But the girl only tilted her head slightly and continued observing. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath as Rex circled the evidence. Officers moved with practiced efficiency, unaware that the child's tiny gestures were already sowing seeds of doubt. The jury watched attentively, absorbing the professional displays of law and procedure, while the girl focused on the nuances, the direction of glances, the weight of footsteps, the subtle flinch of the suspect whenever the dog drew near. Adults called it intuition. The child simply called it observation. As the demonstration concluded, Rex returned to his handler, sitting obediently with his ears perked. The courtroom buzzed with discussion whispers of how perfectly the dog had performed, how reliable its instincts were, and how the evidence seemed undeniable. The prosecution smiled, confident, while the defense quietly strategized on how to handle the final stages. Yet the 3-year-old girl remained the quiet center of attention for those who noticed her. Her small finger still pointed, now directed firmly at the corner of the room, near the security guard who had been overlooked by everyone else. The guard, a middle-aged man with an unassuming presence, shifted nervously, unaware that he had drawn the girl's attention. She mimicked a motion she had observed earlier at the scene of the crime, a subtle hand gesture showing how the real perpetrator had moved. Her mother's heart raced. Could her daughter really remember such a precise detail? The child's memory, sharp and unfiltered, captured something adults had missed. The courtroom, trained to rely on evidence and procedure, was blind to this revelation, yet the girl's awareness was undeniable. The defense attorney, a seasoned professional known for his calm demeanor under pressure, noticed the child's pointing. He paused mid-step, unsure whether to address it immediately. After all, the testimony of a 3-year-old was unconventional, almost unheard of in court. But something about her focus, the precision of her gestures, suggested that ignoring her might be a mistake. He leaned closer to the judge, whispering his observations, careful not to disrupt the proceedings. The judge frowned, intrigued, and allowed a brief recess to assess whether this unusual witness might be relevant. During the recess, the mother knelt beside her daughter, gently holding her hands. "You saw what happened, didn't you?" she asked softly. The girl nodded solemnly, her tiny brows furrowed. "Not him," she repeated, pointing at the suspect once more. The mother's pulse quickened. Her daughter's observations were precise, even replicating motions she had seen earlier that day at the crime scene. The realization struck her. This was not imagination. This was clarity. The girl had seen the truth, and in her innocence, was ready to reveal it. When the court resumed, the defense cautiously approached, allowing the child to speak in a calm and non-threatening manner. Questions were simple, aimed at guiding her to recount what she had seen. She pointed at the suspect, mimicked movements, and repeated her words clearly. "Not him." Murmurs ran through the courtroom. Spectators exchanged bewildered glances, unsure how a toddler could hold such influence over a serious legal proceeding. The judge raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Even the officers and lawyers leaned in, curious. The simplicity and directness of her statements were more powerful than any lawyer's argument, more precise than any piece of forensic evidence presented. The tension in the courtroom mounted. Adults who had arrived confident in their assumptions now began to reconsider. Could the instinct of a 3-year-old outweigh the trained skills of a police dog? Could her memory, untainted by bias or strategy, reveal details that professional investigation had missed? Every person present felt a shift, subtle but undeniable. The girl's innocence, her clarity, and her courage had injected doubt into a case that had seemed airtight. And though she did not fully understand the weight of her words, she had already begun to challenge the assumptions of an entire courtroom. As part 2 drew to a close, the small girl remained seated, hands folded neatly on her lap, eyes bright and attentive. She had already altered the course of the trial, planting seeds of doubt that would grow into a revelation capable of shattering preconceived narratives. The adults continued their arguments, unaware that the most pivotal witness was just a 3-year-old, observing silently, patiently, and with the kind of perceptiveness that only innocence could achieve. In the back row, she prepared to speak again, her 2 simple words ready to challenge assumptions and change everything. The courtroom settled after the brief recess, but the air remained thick with anticipation. Lawyers rustled their papers, jurors exchanged discreet glances, and the suspect shifted uneasily in his chair. The 3-year-old girl, however, remained remarkably composed. She had observed enough to understand that her voice, her gestures, and her focus mattered more than she could yet comprehend. Her small hands rested on her mother's lap, fingers occasionally twitching to point at what she had noticed earlier. Adults often dismissed the subtlety of her gestures, but in truth, every motion carried meaning, a clue that adults might have overlooked entirely. Rex, the German shepherd, returned to the demonstration area, alert and focused. The handler gave a quiet command, and the dog began sniffing around the designated evidence once more. The adults watched intently, noting the precision of his movements, the way his paws barely made a sound on the polished floor, and the slight lift of his nose as he inhaled the scent trails. To them, this was a display of skill, training, and reliability. To the girl, however, it was a conversation in a language only she could interpret. The dog's hesitation, the slight pull of its leash, and the way it shifted its weight all spoke volumes to her keen perception. Her gaze shifted to the suspect. He avoided eye contact, fidgeting under the scrutiny of the jury and the dog's presence. He tugged at his tie and ran a hand through his hair, subtle signs of anxiety that adults interpreted as nervousness. The girl, though too young to understand legal jargon, noticed patterns and inconsistencies that seemed impossible to miss. She leaned forward slightly, finger twitching ever so subtly, pointing again at the man who sat tensely on the bench. Then she paused and looked at her mother, whispering softly, "Not him." Her mother stiffened at the words. She had heard them before, but their repetition carried increasing weight. This was not a random utterance. It was deliberate. The girl's eyes never left the suspect, her tiny face serious and intent. Adults might have dismissed her earlier gestures as innocent play, but now, combined with the context of the ongoing demonstration, her observations began to command attention. Something was unfolding that no one had anticipated. The courtroom, trained to rely on logic, procedure, and canine accuracy, had yet to confront a different form of truth, a truth filtered through innocence and raw perception. The defense attorney, a man with graying hair and years of courtroom experience, noticed the child's finger pointing. His practiced mind raced through the possibilities. Could a 3-year-old's observations be considered at all in a trial? Could her gestures provide insight that adults had overlooked? He glanced at the judge, who observed silently, curiosity written across his lined face. The attorney decided to tread carefully. Any misstep could appear manipulative, but ignoring the child entirely might also mean missing a critical opportunity to challenge the prosecution's narrative. The prosecution continued, displaying photographs of the stolen heirloom and evidence collected from the scene. They highlighted the suspect's movements, his presence near the area, and the dog's reactions. Rex barked softly, circling the suspect with measured caution, signaling attention rather than aggression. The adults nodded approvingly. To them, the case seemed strong, reinforced by the dog's instincts. Yet the girl's eyes saw something different. She noticed that Rex's attention had wavered for a fraction of a second when the evidence trail led to the corner of the room she had already observed. That hesitation was tiny but significant. Her mother whispered a gentle reminder, "Stay calm, honey." The girl nodded but remained intensely focused. She had seen the real actions unfold, had noticed small motions and hidden details that adults had dismissed. She mimicked the movements of the true perpetrator she had observed earlier, subtle hand gestures that recreated the actions of someone who had passed unnoticed. Her gestures were precise, intentional, and meaningful, more reliable than any hearsay or assumption. The realization dawned slowly on those paying attention. The child's memory, her perception, and her clarity were beginning to influence the trial's trajectory. The jury, previously confident in the dog's evidence, started to show subtle signs of distraction. A few jurors exchanged glances, whispering to one another about the child's persistent attention. The defense seized the opportunity to gently highlight her observations without drawing undue attention. They asked her simple, guiding questions. Who did you see? What did you notice? Each time, her responses were calm, deliberate, and consistent. She pointed at the suspect, but then gestured to the area she had already identified, the small corner of the room where the overlooked security guard had been standing. Spectators leaned forward, murmuring quietly among themselves. Some were skeptical, unable to reconcile the idea that a 3-year-old could influence a serious case. Others were fascinated, drawn to the child's courage and clarity. The judge maintained a cautious neutrality, observing the proceedings closely. He recognized that this unusual testimony, though not formal in the legal sense, introduced a perspective that challenged assumptions, forced reconsideration, and demanded attention. The courtroom, usually governed by strict evidence and procedure, was now being subtly guided by the observations of someone who had no legal training, no agenda, and no filter beyond honesty. The suspect's discomfort intensified. He shifted in his chair, eyes darting toward the small girl who pointed unflinchingly in his direction. He had been confident before, relying on his attorney's strategy and the dog's performance. Now, confronted with the purity of a child's observation, he seemed off balance. His fidgeting increased, hands trembling slightly, sweat glistening along his brow. Adults in the courtroom took notice, some exchanging raised eyebrows and whispered comments. Even Rex, the highly trained canine, responded to the growing tension, alert and attentive. As if sensing the shift in energy, the defense attorney carefully approached the child again. "Can you show us what you saw?" he asked, voice calm and reassuring. The girl nodded, leaning slightly forward and gesturing with her small hands. She pointed at the suspect, mimicked movements, and repeated clearly, "Not him." The words echoed faintly through the courtroom. The simplicity of the statement contrasted with the gravity of the situation. The adults absorbed it, stunned by the audacity and clarity of a 3-year-old's observation. It was a pivotal moment, subtle but monumental, hinting that the trial might take an unexpected turn. Officers and lawyers alike began to reconsider the dog's behavior. Rex had been trained to identify scents and follow instinctual cues, yet he had hesitated in ways no one noticed initially. Could the child's observations provide context? Could her memory, untainted by procedure and expectation, reveal what the dog's instincts alone could not? The defense pressed on, guiding her gently through questions. She pointed, gestured, and repeated her words. Every motion was deliberate. Every word carried meaning. Adults, initially dismissive, began to realize that this child's innocence held a clarity that their experience sometimes obscured. The tension in the room mounted further. Spectators whispered and shifted in their seats. Jurors leaned forward, caught between the dog's training and the child's observations. The suspect's confidence wavered, and even the judge felt the shift in energy. The courtroom had transformed from a display of procedure to a theater of revelation. Adults relied on evidence, assumptions, and training, but the child relied on observation and honesty. And as the proceedings continued, it became clear. The 2 words she had spoken softly to her mother, "Not him," were not just words. They were the catalyst for a breakthrough that no one had anticipated. By the end of the day's first session, the adults were forced to reconsider. Lawyers conferred quietly, officers reviewed the dog's behavior, and the judge made a mental note to allow further questioning. The girl, unaware of her growing influence, simply sat, observing, poised to speak again. She had already altered the trial's trajectory. Her innocent clarity had planted doubt in the minds of everyone present, subtly undermining assumptions, and quietly challenging the narrative the prosecution had constructed. And though she did not yet understand it fully, her 2 words and precise gestures were reshaping the courtroom's understanding of truth. The courtroom was charged with a quiet tension, the kind that made every footstep, every whisper, and every shifting chair echo louder than usual. The proceedings had resumed, yet the atmosphere felt different. There was an undercurrent of uncertainty, a subtle shift caused by the smallest of witnesses, a 3-year-old girl whose quiet determination had begun to challenge assumptions long held by adults. She sat in her mother's lap, her tiny hands folded but her eyes scanning the room, alert to every motion, every expression, every nuance. Rex, the German Shepherd, was once again brought forward by his handler, moving with deliberate precision. The dog's training was impeccable. He circled the evidence, sniffed the suspect, and responded to commands with an efficiency that inspired confidence. Yet, despite Rex's flawless performance, the adults in the courtroom now noticed something they hadn't before. The girl's eyes tracked the dog's movements like a hawk, following the subtle shifts in his posture, the pauses, and the minute adjustments of his paws. To her, these were clues. To the adults, they were nearly invisible, easily dismissed as trivial. The prosecution launched into a detailed explanation of the evidence, highlighting the suspect's alleged actions and Rex's responses. Every word, every photograph, every exhibit was designed to solidify the narrative of guilt. The jury listened intently, nodding along, some taking meticulous notes. The judge maintained his usual stern composure, observing without interruption. And yet, beneath the surface of this well-structured presentation, doubt was beginning to creep in, seated by a voice barely audible, but piercing in its simplicity. The voice of a child. Her mother whispered a quiet reminder, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Be calm, sweetheart. Just stay calm." The girl nodded, but her attention never wavered. She had seen the truth, and she was prepared to share it. Her eyes flicked toward the suspect, then toward the overlooked corner where she had previously noticed movements inconsistent with the main narrative. The courtroom's focus remained largely on Rex, on the suspect, and on the attorneys, but the girl's perception was unfiltered, untainted by expectation or fear. Then, as if summoned by the weight of the moment, the child spoke aloud for the first time, in a manner the entire courtroom could hear. "Not him," she said, her voice small yet firm. Silence fell instantly. The words cut through the murmur of the crowd, the shuffle of papers, and even the soft footsteps of court officers. Heads turned. A judge leaned forward, eyebrows raised in surprise. Lawyers froze mid-gesture. Spectators gaped. Even the suspect stiffened, as if the simple, two-word declaration carried a weight far beyond its sound. The courtroom had never experienced anything like it. The words were unremarkable on the surface, yet their impact was seismic. They challenged the narrative, constructed by evidence, expert testimony, and a highly trained police dog. 2 syllables spoken by a toddler had introduced a doubt so pure, so undeniable, that it could not be ignored. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. What did she mean? Could a 3-year-old truly perceive guilt and innocence with such clarity? Could her simple observation outweigh meticulous investigation? The prosecution's attorney shifted uneasily, glancing at the defense. His carefully constructed arguments suddenly felt fragile, exposed to an unexpected and unconventional force. He attempted to maintain composure, offering polite instructions to continue with evidence, but the courtroom's energy had shifted irrevocably. The dog's presence, once a source of unassailable authority, now seemed subject to reinterpretation. Even Rex, aware of the tension, hesitated subtly, pausing in mid-step as if sensing the profound change in focus. The defense attorney seized the moment. He approached the child gently, ensuring she felt safe and unpressured. "Can you tell us more about what you saw?" he asked in a calm, inviting tone. The girl nodded and pointed deliberately at the corner of the room she had observed earlier. She mimicked a movement she had witnessed, recreating the subtle gesture of someone who had gone unnoticed. Her words were few, but her gestures spoke volumes. The 2 words she had uttered, "not him," were reinforced by the clarity and precision of her actions. The judge watched with rapt attention, his previous skepticism replaced by curiosity. He understood that this child, in her innocence, had introduced a perspective that no adult had considered. She had no motive, no agenda, no bias, only observation and memory. Her clarity forced reconsideration of the suspect's behavior, Rex's reactions, and the entire sequence of events leading up to the crime. The courtroom, usually guided by procedure and expertise, was now being subtly directed by the insight of someone barely old enough to walk. Unassisted. The suspect shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His confident demeanor, so carefully maintained throughout the morning, began to falter. He glanced toward the small girl, her tiny finger pointing directly at him, and a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. The officers exchanged silent looks. Could it be possible that this child's observation was revealing a critical truth they had overlooked? Could her perception, unclouded by professional bias, point to the real culprit? Doubt began to ripple through the room, subtle at first, but increasingly undeniable. Spectators whispered among themselves, astonished by the audacity of the child and the clarity of her observation. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Could a 3-year-old actually influence the course of justice? Others leaned forward in fascination, captivated by the unfolding drama. The courtroom had transformed into something extraordinary, a theater in which innocence, observation, and courage collided with trained experience and conventional evidence. And at the center of this quiet revolution sat the child, calm, observant, and remarkably confident. The defense attorney guided her carefully through further questioning. "What did you notice about the person you saw?" he asked gently. She mimicked additional movements, recreating the actions she had observed, pointing again to the overlooked security guard and away from the accused. Every gesture was precise, deliberate, and meaningful. The courtroom held its collective breath. Even the judge and jury, trained to weigh facts and expertise, could not ignore the resonance of truth in her actions. The child's innocence had become a beacon, illuminating details that adults had misinterpreted or ignored. The prosecution struggled to maintain control. Their arguments, once seemingly airtight, now appeared fragile. They attempted to redirect attention to Rex, emphasizing the dog's training and reliability. Yet even the dog's impeccable instincts were now subject to reinterpretation. The subtle hesitations, the pauses, the moments when the dog's attention shifted all took on new significance in light of the child's testimony. Adults, trained to rely on procedure and experience, found themselves forced to consider an alternative lens, the clarity of untainted observation. By mid-afternoon, the tension in the courtroom had reached a crescendo. Every movement, every gesture, every word of the child carried weight. The 2 words, "not him," had become a rallying point for reconsideration, challenging assumptions that had long been taken for granted. Spectators leaned forward, jurors exchanged thoughtful glances, and even the suspect's confidence wavered under the gaze of a child whose perception cut through complexity, like a knife through fog. The courtroom, a space usually defined by protocol and evidence, had been transformed into a stage for revelation. As the first full day of proceedings came to a close, the child remained seated, calm, and composed. She had altered the dynamics of the trial without ever fully realizing it. Adults now whispered about what had occurred, debating the implications of her words and gestures. The defense and prosecution reviewed notes and footage, while the judge pondered how best to proceed. And all the while, the child's 2 words lingered in the air, unassuming yet powerful. A simple declaration that had begun to shatter assumptions, reframe the narrative, and challenge everyone in the courtroom to reconsider what they thought they knew. The courtroom emptied slowly, leaving a lingering energy of disbelief, curiosity, and anticipation. The small girl walked quietly with her mother, oblivious to the historical impact of her statements. She had spoken only 2 words, yet those words carried the potential to overturn assumptions, reshape the trial, and reveal a truth long hidden from the eyes of adults. The first ripple had been cast, and it would grow steadily, changing the course of the case, and perhaps the lives of everyone involved, in ways no one could yet fully predict. The next morning, the courtroom buzzed with a different energy. What had started as a straightforward burglary case had now transformed into something almost unrecognizable. The focus had subtly shifted from trained evidence and meticulous testimony to the perceptive eyes of a 3-year-old girl. Spectators and jurors alike felt a tension that was both fragile and electrifying. Everyone seemed to sense that this trial, which had begun with procedure and confidence, now teetered on the edge of revelation. The child, small and unassuming, had become the focal point of curiosity, awe, and, for some, anxiety. Rex, the German Shepherd, was already present, calmly sitting at attention. His handler adjusted the leash and nodded, ready to continue the demonstration. The adults in the room had developed a newfound respect for the dog's capabilities, yet they were also beginning to reconsider the interpretations of his behavior. Subtle pauses, fleeting hesitations, and small shifts in posture suddenly appeared far more significant under the lens of the girl's observations. She, of course, noticed everything: the way his ears twitched, the faint lift of a paw, the direction of his gaze, and interpreted these minute cues with a precision that surprised even those who had dedicated decades to criminal investigation. The suspect fidgeted in his chair, his confidence from the previous day noticeably diminished. His eyes darted toward the little girl, and a faint flush crept across his face. No one had expected a toddler to hold such power over the courtroom's perception. Adults who had dismissed her initially now found themselves scrutinizing her every gesture. She had pointed, mimicked, and whispered, and suddenly the balance of the trial had shifted. Questions that had seemed settled were now unsettled. Evidence that appeared uncheckable was now under the scrutiny of innocence itself. The defense attorney leaned forward, watching carefully as the child observed the scene. He began to speak in measured, gentle tones, asking her simple questions. "Can you show us what you saw at the scene?" he asked. The child nodded solemnly, her expression serious, her tiny hands moving deliberately. She pointed to the corner of the room where a security guard had been stationed, previously unnoticed by the adults. She mimicked the subtle movements she had observed, the slight shuffle of feet, the furtive glance, the tiny hand gestures. Each action was precise, a perfect recreation of what she had witnessed. Her mother's pulse quickened. Could her daughter really remember so many details? The clarity with which she reproduced the suspects and the guard's actions was astonishing. Adults began to murmur, exchanging glances that ranged from skepticism to awe. The judge observed carefully, noting the unusual nature of this testimony. He had presided over countless trials in his career, yet he had never encountered a situation where a 3-year-old's observations held such potential weight. The courtroom now faced a dilemma: how to reconcile the innocence of a child with the strict procedures and evidentiary rules that governed adult proceedings. The prosecution shifted uneasily in their seats. Their narrative, once confident and unassailable, now appeared vulnerable. They attempted to highlight the dog's training and the suspect's previous inconsistencies, but the subtle truth revealed by the child began to undermine their arguments. The more the child pointed and mimicked, the more the adults recognized that their understanding had been incomplete. The dog's instincts were precise, but even a trained canine could not account for certain human behaviors, overlooked movements, or nuanced gestures. The child's observations filled those gaps with startling clarity. Officers consulted quietly, reviewing notes and recalling the day of the incident. They began to see what the child had seen. The overlooked security guard had indeed been present in ways they hadn't initially considered significant. Movements previously dismissed as inconsequential now seemed to matter, revealing patterns that contradicted the prosecution's initial assumptions. The courtroom, normally a place of strict procedure and hierarchy, had become a theater where observation, intuition, and honesty challenged authority. The child, without realizing it, had become the linchpin of an unfolding revelation. The jury leaned forward, captivated. They had come prepared to weigh evidence, witness statements, and the dog's performance. Instead, they now witnessed the power of clarity, unfiltered by fear, ambition, or strategy. Each gesture, each point, each whispered word from the child carried weight. "Not him," she repeated at key moments, reinforcing her earlier statement. Her focus never wavered. Adults watched in astonishment as her gestures aligned with previously overlooked details, subtly reconstructing the true sequence of events. What had seemed simple, straightforward, and conclusive now demanded reconsideration. The defense attorney gently guided her through additional questions. "Who did you see moving suspiciously?" he asked. The child pointed again at the security guard, imitating the subtle glances and cautious steps she had observed. The room was silent. The weight of the demonstration struck everyone present. Even Rex paused momentarily, sensing the tension. The judge leaned forward, intrigued by the precision and honesty of her actions. No one doubted the child's sincerity. She had seen what she had seen, and she had recreated it with remarkable fidelity. Witnesses were recalled. Security footage was re-examined. Patterns emerged that aligned with the child's observations. Adults who had initially dismissed her now faced a startling realization. This toddler's memory and attention to detail were more accurate than many of their assumptions. Her gestures had revealed aspects of the scene previously ignored, offering context that even trained professionals had missed. The courtroom had become a place where innocence and honesty held more weight than procedural expertise, where a small voice challenged confident assertions, and where the truth began to emerge from unexpected sources. The suspect's demeanor shifted dramatically. Anxiety etched deeper lines across his face. He glanced nervously toward the child, realizing that her simple observation had begun to unravel the narrative he had relied upon. The dog's reaction, once seen as definitive, now seemed inconclusive in the light of the child's testimony. The adults around him began whispering, reviewing assumptions and reconsidering the evidence they had taken for granted. The trial, which had appeared straightforward, had transformed into a delicate balancing act between trained procedure and unfiltered observation. By the end of the day, the courtroom had undergone a subtle but profound transformation. The focus had shifted from Rex's performance and the suspect's demeanor to the clear, unambiguous observations of a 3-year-old. Adults debated quietly, speculated, and reconsidered, while the child remained calm, seated in her mother's lap, seemingly unaware of the extraordinary role she had begun to play. Her simple words, "not him," had sparked a chain reaction that questioned assumptions, redefined perspectives, and hinted at a revelation capable of altering the course of the trial. The mother held her daughter's hand, a mixture of pride and apprehension in her eyes. "You're very brave," she whispered softly. The child looked up briefly, then returned her attention to the courtroom, her focus unwavering. She had seen the truth, and in her innocence, she had begun to reveal it. Adults, trained to analyze, interpret, and judge, now relied on a perspective they had never anticipated. The courtroom, usually a domain of expertise and procedure, had become a space where honesty, clarity, and observation triumphed over assumption. As the courtroom emptied for the day, conversations buzzed quietly in the hallways. Lawyers, officers, and spectators reflected on the child's role. Could her gestures and observations truly carry weight in a legal proceeding? Could a 3-year-old's clarity expose oversights that adults had overlooked? Every adult present realized that the trial's course had changed irrevocably. And somewhere in the back row, the small girl, oblivious to the growing significance of her actions, sat quietly with her mother, ready to observe, ready to point, and ready to speak again. Her 2 words had already begun to echo louder than anyone had imagined. The courtroom felt heavier that morning, a quiet tension settling over every person present. Days of testimony, evidence, and meticulous demonstrations had prepared everyone for a conventional trial, but the 3-year-old girl had altered the trajectory entirely. Her subtle gestures, sharp observations, and unwavering 2-word declaration, "not him," were now guiding the courtroom toward a revelation adults had not anticipated. Even seasoned officers, lawyers, and jurors were forced to reconsider assumptions they had long accepted as truth. What had seemed like a straightforward burglary case had grown into something far more complex, with a child's perspective reshaping the narrative. Rex, the German Shepherd, remained calm but alert, his ears twitching slightly as the handler adjusted his leash. The dog had performed impeccably in prior demonstrations, yet now his movements were scrutinized through a different lens. The subtle pauses, hesitations, and shifts in his attention that had been almost imperceptible before now carried significant weight. The small girl, observing closely, seemed to understand the nuances instinctively. Her gaze followed every movement, the dog's paw placement, the tilt of its head, the way it sniffed near the evidence. Adults had relied on the dog's training. She relied on observation. The defense attorney rose, speaking carefully to the judge. "Your Honor," he said, "we would like to conduct a detailed review of the evidence in light of our youngest witness's observations. She has noticed aspects that were previously overlooked." The judge, intrigued and slightly skeptical, nodded. He understood the unconventional nature of this request, but also recognized that the child's testimony could not be dismissed lightly. "Proceed carefully," he instructed. "We will accommodate her input, but I expect this to remain orderly and respectful of courtroom protocol." The child's mother gave her a reassuring squeeze. "You're doing great, sweetheart," she whispered. The girl nodded solemnly, her small face set with determination. She had seen the events unfold in a way that adults had not. Every motion, glance, and subtle gesture she had noticed earlier formed a clear pattern in her mind. Today, she would reveal more of what she had observed, and adults would realize that clarity could sometimes come from the most unexpected places. The defense began by asking simple, clear questions. "Can you show us again what you saw that day?" The child mimicked movements with precision. A shuffle of feet, a subtle hand gesture, a glance toward the corner of the room. She pointed deliberately at the security guard who had been overlooked, contrasting his actions with the man accused of theft. The courtroom watched in astonishment. Her gestures reconstructed the crime scene in a way that highlighted previously unseen patterns. Every movement was deliberate, every action mattered, and her clarity left little room for misinterpretation. Spectators whispered nervously. Could a 3-year-old's gestures really change the understanding of events that adults had been scrutinizing for days? The jury leaned forward, captivated by the precision of the child's reenactment. Even the prosecution, once confident, was forced to pause. Their previously airtight narrative seemed to falter under the weight of her observations. They attempted to redirect attention to Rex, highlighting the dog's training and instincts. But the child's input had introduced a new dimension: human observation, unclouded by assumption, bias, or procedure. The officers began reviewing the child's gestures against existing evidence. Security footage was scrutinized with new questions in mind. As the movements were matched frame by frame, a startling pattern emerged. The security guard had indeed acted suspiciously, and his position in the room had been misinterpreted or ignored by adults. The suspect, previously assumed guilty, had been wrongly implicated. The subtle details the child had captured provided context that no one else had noticed. Her observations were accurate, and their implications were monumental. The suspect shifted nervously in his chair, realizing that the tide had turned. Confidence drained from his posture, replaced by unease. His eyes flicked toward the small girl, who pointed with deliberate precision, repeating, "Not him." He realized that her words, simple though they were, could expose flaws in the prosecution's case. Even Rex, sensing the shift in energy, paused mid-step. The courtroom had become a stage where innocence and observation held as much power as training and procedure, and the child was the center of attention. The defense attorney, sensing the pivotal moment, continued to guide her through gentle questioning. "Can you show us who actually did it?" The child pointed toward the previously overlooked guard, mimicking his movements at the scene. She recreated subtle glances, shifts in weight, and hand gestures with astounding accuracy. Each action was deliberate and unmistakable, forming a sequence that aligned with evidence that had been previously dismissed or overlooked. Adults exchanged astonished glances. The realization was dawning. The true sequence of events was now becoming clear. Guided by the child's memory and observation, the judge leaned forward. intrigued by the clarity and honesty of her gestures. He understood the significance. A 3-year-old had revealed a truth that had eluded professionals for days. He addressed the courtroom. "We will need to reassess the evidence in light of these observations. They appear to provide important context previously unconsidered." The statement sent a ripple of acknowledgement throughout the room. Lawyers, officers, and jurors all recognized that the trial had entered a turning point, where the balance of understanding had shifted decisively. Security footage was replayed, now examined with the child's observations as a guide. Every gesture, glance, and movement highlighted by the girl was matched against reality. Patterns emerged. The security guard's actions, once thought mundane, now appeared deliberate and suspicious. The accused man, previously assumed guilty, was exonerated from key moments of the timeline. The 2-word statement, "Not him," combined with her precise gestures, had not only introduced doubt, it had illuminated the truth. Adults who had doubted her initially now marveled at her clarity and courage. Courtroom's energy shifted from doubt to revelation. Witnesses were recalled to corroborate the new interpretation of events. Every participant realized that the child's observations had fundamentally changed the understanding of the crime scene. Even Rex's instincts, once deemed infallible, were now contextualized by her clarity. The subtle signals the dog had given were no longer standalone evidence, but part of a larger narrative revealed through the child's observation. The courtroom had moved from a realm of confidence to one of careful reevaluation. By mid-afternoon, the turning point was undeniable. The true perpetrator, previously overlooked, had been identified. The security guard, who had gone unnoticed for much of the investigation, was now the focus. The suspect, initially accused, was confirmed innocent of the actions highlighted by the child. The judge commended the child's honesty and precision, acknowledging that her observations had been instrumental in uncovering the truth. The courtroom, once confident in assumptions, now marveled at the clarity a 3-year-old could bring to complex events. The mother held her daughter's hand, a mixture of pride and awe in her eyes. She whispered softly, "You helped find the truth." The child looked up briefly, then returned her focus to the proceedings, calm and composed. Her 2 words, "Not him," had become a catalyst for justice, reshaping perceptions and revealing overlooked facts. The courtroom, often governed by procedure, rules, and expertise, had been subtly but profoundly transformed by the clarity of a child's observation. As the day concluded, spectators, jurors, and officers reflected on the events. The trial had shifted from a conventional investigation into a remarkable demonstration of innocence, observation, and courage. Adults had been reminded that clarity can come from unexpected sources, and that assumptions, no matter how confident, are subject to challenge. The child, unaware of her growing fame or the impact of her words, had already reshaped the understanding of the case. Her 2 words and precise gestures were now a guiding force in the pursuit of justice. The courtroom felt different that morning, as if the air itself recognized the gravity of what was unfolding. The 3-year-old girl sat quietly in her mother's lap, eyes bright, hands poised, and attention unwavering. What had begun as a simple display of Rex's skills had evolved into a profound demonstration of observation, perception, and truth. Adults, lawyers, officers, and jurors alike were now fully aware that this small child had shifted the focus of the entire case with nothing more than 2 words, "Not him." The implications of those words and the gestures that accompanied them were becoming impossible to ignore. The defense attorney rose, carefully adjusting his notes. "Your Honor," he said, "we request a full review of the security footage, guided by our youngest witness's observations. She has provided insights that reveal critical aspects of the sequence of events." The judge, leaning forward with keen interest, nodded. He had witnessed countless trials, Yet this situation defied precedent. A 3-year-old's observations had forced adults to re-examine evidence they had trusted implicitly. "Proceed," he instructed, his tone both cautious and curious. "Let us see what these observations reveal." The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. The child's mother whispered reassurance to her daughter. "You're doing great," she said softly. The girl nodded, absorbing the quiet support, and focused once more on the space before her. Her eyes scanned the room, noting the subtle positions of chairs, the angle of light, and even the faint scuff marks on the floor. Each tiny detail mattered. Each gesture carried significance. Adults had relied on procedural evidence and trained instincts, but the child relied on direct observation, an unfiltered lens that revealed patterns others had overlooked. Rex was brought forward once again, his paws clicking lightly on the polished floor. The handler gave him a quiet command, and the dog moved toward the evidence with precision. Observers focused on the dog's performance, yet the child noticed subtleties that adults missed. A hesitation here, a slight tilt of the head there, a fraction of a second's pause before approaching certain objects. Her gestures followed these movements, drawing attention to inconsistencies that had previously gone unnoticed. Every motion she recreated aligned with events that had been partially obscured in the chaos of the initial investigation. The defense guided her carefully, asking simple, clear questions. "Can you show us what really happened?" The child pointed deliberately, first at the suspect, then at the corner of the room. She mimicked motions, the subtle shuffle of feet, the fleeting glance, the hand gestures of the overlooked security guard. Every action was precise, deliberate, and meaningful. The courtroom leaned in, astonished by the clarity of her observation. Jurors exchanged glances, officers nodded thoughtfully, and even the judge's expression shifted from curiosity to recognition. This child's memory, untainted by fear or strategy, was reconstructing the truth in real time. The suspect, once confident, now shifted uneasily in his chair. He glanced toward the girl, her small finger pointing directly at him, yet emphasizing the corner where the guard had acted suspiciously. Anxiety replaced arrogance. The dog's behavior, which had once seemed definitive, now appeared inconclusive when viewed in the context of her observations. Every adult present felt the tension. The courtroom had moved from certainty to careful reconsideration. What had been assumed to be guilt was now under intense scrutiny. Guided by a perspective no one had anticipated, the defense attorney carefully continued. "Who do you see acting suspiciously?" he asked. The child's gestures were deliberate. She pointed to the guard, demonstrating the subtle mannerisms she had noticed. A quick glance, a slight repositioning, a fleeting movement that suggested concealment. The judge and jury watched intently, processing the implications. The security guard, who had previously been overlooked as routine personnel, was suddenly the center of attention. The realization rippled through the courtroom. The child's 2 words had not only defended an innocent man, but also highlighted the real culprit. Spectators murmured in disbelief. Could a toddler's observations truly carry such weight? Could innocence, memory, and focus outshine procedural expertise and trained instincts? The courtroom's dynamic had been irreversibly altered. Adults who had dismissed the child now recognized her unique role. Even Rex, highly trained and intuitive, could not provide the nuanced interpretation she offered. The subtle patterns, the overlooked details, the exact sequence of gestures, these were the elements that revealed truth, now articulated through a combination of observation and gesture, rather than words alone. Security, footage, and prior statements were reviewed again, frame by frame. Observers matched the child's gestures to the recorded evidence. The subtle, overlooked actions of the guard became increasingly clear. He had moved in ways that the accused man could not have replicated. The child's mimicry perfectly aligned with these movements, confirming her account. Adults were astonished. What had seemed like an airtight case, based on circumstantial evidence and canine instincts, was now being rewritten before their eyes. The innocence of a 3-year-old had exposed hidden truths and illuminated the real sequence of events. The suspect's tension deepened. His confidence had eroded completely. Each gesture, each observation by the child, reinforced the possibility that he was innocent of the specific allegations tied to the main crime. The officers and lawyers consulted quietly, reviewing their notes and the footage in real time. The courtroom, previously dominated by procedure and experience, had become a space dominated by observation and clarity. Every participant understood that the child's role was pivotal. Her innocence, precision, and courage had shifted the balance of understanding. The defense attorney, seizing the moment, asked further questions. "Can you show us the person who actually did this?" The child's tiny hands mimicked the guard's movements flawlessly. She pointed, recreated subtle glances, and demonstrated hidden actions. The court watched, captivated by the accuracy and clarity of her reenactment. Jurors leaned forward, spectators whispered, and even the judge acknowledged the meticulous precision of the child's observation. Adults who had relied on assumptions were forced to reconsider every detail. The truth, once obscured, was now emerging through the lens of innocence. The implications were profound. The child's observations had not only cleared the innocent man, but also identified the individual who had committed the actions in question. The prosecution, initially confident, now faced the undeniable reality that their interpretation of events had been flawed. Rex's instincts, while reliable, had been contextualized by the child's clarity, revealing nuances that a trained dog could detect but not fully interpret. Her gestures and statements became central to understanding the true sequence of events. By late afternoon, the courtroom had reached a turning point that none could ignore. Evidence, witnesses, and canine demonstrations all pointed to the same conclusion. The accused man had not committed the acts highlighted by the child's observations. The real culprit, previously overlooked, was now identified. The judge addressed the court, acknowledging the extraordinary circumstances. The observations of our youngest witness have provided critical insights into this case, he stated. Her clarity, honesty, and attention to detail have revealed facts that were previously obscured. This court recognizes her contribution to understanding the truth. The mother held her daughter's hand tightly, tears brimming in her eyes. "You helped find the truth," she whispered. The child nodded, her small face serene, oblivious to the historical significance of her words and gestures. Her 2 words, "not him," had not only shifted the course of a courtroom drama, but also restored justice, challenged assumptions, and illuminated the importance of observation, honesty, and innocence. Adults marveled at the courage and clarity of someone so small, realizing that sometimes truth is best revealed through eyes untainted by bias or expectation. As the day ended, spectators, jurors, officers, and lawyers alike reflected on the profound lessons the trial had imparted. The courtroom, a place traditionally governed by procedure, evidence, and experience, had been transformed by the unfiltered clarity of a child. Her observations had corrected errors, revealed hidden truths, and reshaped the understanding of events. The 2 simple words she had spoken had become a catalyst for justice, demonstrating the extraordinary power of innocence, attention, and courage in uncovering the truth. The courtroom was silent as the final pieces of the case fell into place. Days of testimony, evidence, and precise canine demonstrations had all been overshadowed by the quiet, unassuming clarity of a 3-year-old girl. Her 2 words, "not him," and the gestures that accompanied them had become the turning point, revealing the truth that adults had overlooked. The judge, the jury, the attorneys, and the spectators all recognized that the trial had transformed into something extraordinary, a demonstration of innocence, observation, and honesty wielded as a force for Justice Doc Rex. The German Shepherd lay calmly at his handler's feet, seemingly aware of the tension that lingered in the room. His trained instincts had been precise, his work impeccable, but it was the child's observations that provided the crucial context. Adults had relied on procedure, expertise, and assumptions. She relied on memory, observation, and the purity of truth. The subtle hesitations she had noticed in the dog's movements, the overlooked cues from the guard, and the precise recreation of gestures, all pointed to a reality previously hidden. The defense attorney stood, voice steady but filled with emotion. "Your Honor," he said, "our youngest witness has provided clarity that has reshaped this entire case. The accused has consistently been innocent of the actions identified in the evidence. The real perpetrator has been revealed through her observations, gestures, and declarations." He gestured gently toward the child, who sat calmly, her hands folded in her lap, eyes wide but focused. The courtroom leaned forward, collectively absorbing the gravity of the statement. The judge adjusted his glasses, studying the child's demeanor. He had presided over countless cases, yet never had he witnessed a trial pivot on the observations of a toddler. He cleared his throat. "This court recognizes the extraordinary contribution of our youngest witness," he stated. "Her honesty, focus, and clarity have revealed critical facts previously overlooked. In light of this evidence, the accused is hereby cleared of the charges under question, and the case will be redirected toward the individual identified through her observations." Murmurs filled the courtroom as the weight of the announcement sank in. The accused man's shoulders slumped with relief. He exhaled deeply, the tension of the past days dissipating in an instant. Tears welled in his eyes as he glanced toward the child, recognizing that her small voice had protected him from wrongful conviction. He extended a hand, and his attorney placed it gently on his shoulder, whispering reassurance. The child remained composed, unaware of the monumental impact of her actions. To her, she had simply spoken the truth, pointed when necessary, and observed carefully the basics of honesty that adults often forgot. The prosecution attorney rose slowly, acknowledging the child's role. While unconventional, it is clear that her observations have provided insight that traditional evidence alone could not reveal, he said. This court has learned a valuable lesson. Truth can emerge from the most unexpected sources. We will proceed with an investigation focused on the individual identified, ensuring that justice is served fully and accurately. His words, though formal, carried a hint of awe. The courtroom had witnessed something extraordinary, a testament to clarity unclouded by bias, fear, or procedure. The small girl's mother gently squeezed her hand. "You were amazing," she whispered softly. The girl looked up briefly, then back to the courtroom, her attention unwavering. She did not yet understand the magnitude of her role, but adults around her were acutely aware. The two words she had spoken, "not him," had become a beacon, guiding the courtroom through doubt, misinterpretation, and assumption to a place of clarity and justice. Even the most experienced professionals could not ignore the impact of her perception. Rex, sensing the shift in atmosphere, wagged his tail slightly, as if acknowledging the resolution. His handler smiled quietly, proud of the dog's work, but aware that the child's insight had truly changed the outcome. Every observer recognized that this trial had been a collaboration of sorts. Trained expertise combined with unfiltered innocence, procedure tempered by clarity, and assumption replaced by observation. The child had reminded everyone present that truth often reveals itself through honesty and careful attention, not just through experience or authority. The jury members exchanged glances, some nodding slowly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. They had entered the courtroom prepared to weigh evidence, analyze procedures, and follow protocols. Instead, they were guided by the perceptive observations of a toddler. Each juror reflected on the subtle gestures, the deliberate movements, and the 2 words that had shattered assumptions. The lesson was clear. Innocence and honesty could reveal truths that experience alone might overlook. This case would remain a landmark in their memories, an enduring reminder of the power of observation. The suspect, now officially exonerated, stood to leave the courtroom. He paused, looking down at the small girl, who pointed at him once more and repeated her words softly. Not him. A wave of gratitude and awe swept through him. This tiny voice had saved him, redirected the focus of justice, and highlighted the truth hidden in plain sight. He could not help but marvel at the courage and insight of someone so young. Adults often complicated matters. She had simplified them with clarity and honesty. The focus shifted to the security guard, whose subtle actions had been revealed through the child's observations. Officers moved quietly to address the new evidence, ensuring that proper procedures were followed. The prosecution and defense worked together to reassess their notes, statements, and previous conclusions. The courtroom, once tense and uncertain, was now a space of resolution and acknowledgement. Adults reflected on the extraordinary lessons of the case, recognizing that justice could sometimes be guided by perspectives they least expected. The judge, addressing the room, summarized the lessons of the trial. Today, this court has witnessed an extraordinary occurrence. A 3-year-old's observations, honesty, and focus have revealed the truth in ways that experience alone could not. Let this serve as a reminder that justice is not only procedural, but also perceptive, and that clarity can emerge from innocence as well as expertise. The contributions of all involved, including our youngest witness, will be remembered as a testament to the unexpected ways truth can be revealed. Spectators slowly filed out, still murmuring in disbelief and admiration. News reporters captured the moment, their cameras trained on the child, her mother, and Rex. The story of a 3-year-old who had reshaped a courtroom would quickly spread, inspiring awe and reflection. Adults marveled at the courage, honesty, and precision of someone so small, while children across the country would hear of a peer whose 2 words had changed the course of justice. It was a story that would linger in memory, a powerful reminder of the impact of observation and truth. The small girl finally rose, hand in her mother's grasp, and left the courtroom with calm confidence. She had played her part with simplicity, honesty, and focus, never fully understanding the extraordinary effect her observations had produced. Her gestures, her 2 words, and her unwavering attention had illuminated the truth, exonerated an innocent man, and guided the justice system toward clarity. The world outside the courtroom would soon learn of her courage, but for now, she walked quietly, content in the simple knowledge that she had spoken honestly and acted faithfully. As the courtroom emptied completely, the adults reflected on the profound lessons of the trial. Lawyers, officers, and jurors all recognized that even in a structured, evidence-driven system, truth could emerge in unexpected ways. A 3-year-old had challenged assumptions, revealed overlooked details, and shifted the balance of justice. Her 2 words, not him, and her deliberate gestures had become the cornerstone of clarity in a case that had begun with confidence and routine procedure but ended with revelation, humility, and a renewed understanding of the power of observation. The story of the small girl, Rex the police dog, and the courtroom drama would endure in memory. It would be recounted as a lesson in innocence, courage, and the profound impact a single observer could have. Adults left with a newfound respect for clarity, unclouded by experience, while the child left quietly, having fulfilled a role far greater than her years. Justice had been served, not solely through evidence or authority, but through honesty, observation, and the quiet power of a child who spoke just 2 words.